Cool. So we are continuing our series looking at the man Joshua. And like I said, today for the first time we'll read out of the book of Joshua. And one more time, historical recap. The people of Israel were slaves in Egypt. And God had promised to their forefathers that they would live in the promised land, which is now Israel. And he led them out of Egypt under Moses' leadership. We talked about how they could have gone into the land, but most of them said, no, we're too scared. The people are too big and their cities are too fortified. So God said, fine. All of this generation except Joshua and Caleb will die in the desert. Then the next generation will get to go in. And so then they wandered in the desert for 40 years, waiting for everyone to die. And then what we're going to look at today is when the authority was passed from Moses to Joshua. So Moses was the leader of the people of Israel for all that time in the desert. And then when it came time for them to cross into the promised land, Moses died. And just before he died, he handed over authority to Joshua. That's what we're going to look at today. So I'll read the verses 1 to 5 first. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the great sea on the west. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So, I was thinking about this, because as we read the story, right, Joshua's mentioned once or twice, maybe 3 times before this. So if we were reading the story straight through, he's not featured prominently. But we talked 2 weeks ago about how Joshua was like the #1 aide servant to Moses. So he was like Moses' right-hand guy. When Moses went up Mount Sinai, Joshua went halfway up with him. I reviewed this week, he didn't actually go up to the top, but he walked up the mountain with him when Moses went to get the 10 Commandments. He was like the #1 lieutenant, right? Joshua. And I was thinking, even though we don't hear about him a lot as we read that Exodus story, the people of Israel knew Joshua well. As they were following Moses, they knew Joshua was Moses' #1 guy. They had to realize that eventually Moses wouldn't be the leader anymore. And Joshua and Moses surely knew that eventually Moses was going to die and somebody else was going to have to lead. And it seems logical that Joshua would be the next guy. So whereas you and I, we read the story and we get to Joshua chapter 1 and we go, oh, okay, new character on the scene. Look at that. All of a sudden, new leader. But I'm thinking Joshua was probably preparing for this for like a couple of decades. Like probably 10, 20 years before they actually get ready to cross into Israel, he's aware he's going to be the guy. As he's fighting these battles, he's developing relationships with people and their families that are setting him up to be the leader of the nation. And so it was anticipated. They knew this was coming. And then in this moment, it happens. Have you ever had a feeling, have you ever been in a position like that where you were waiting for something and waiting for something and waiting for something and then all of a sudden it happened? Like a promotion would be a direct analogy, right? And there's this time, like, for me, it's like when I was waiting to do a job, like even when we'll use this as an example. I knew a little bit before we started the process of planting a church that was probably the direction things were going. There was probably 6 or 9 months where that was clear, but I was still, before I did this, I just did graphics and communication for our network, I did graphics and communication for our network of churches, so I was doing web and print media. And I knew I was probably going to plant a church, and I was anticipating that. And in my head, I was like, yeah, I can do that. Sure. Right? I know what I would do here, and there. I'm pretty sure I've got a plan. Right? Then that day comes where the shift is made, and all of a sudden, that's my primary job. And I go, oh. So now I have to do it? I can't just talk about how I know what I'm doing. I actually have to do it. Right? I think that must be how Joshua had felt. He had watched Moses, he had helped him, he had said, okay, I'm getting this, right? I've led some armies. I've stood next to Moses while he had to figure out disputes among the people. I can do this. I can lead the nation, right? And then God says to him, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land. Oh, so I actually have to do it now. Right? I can't just talk about it anymore. And that can be overwhelming. That can be overwhelming. But let's look at what God says in the next few verses. 6 through 9. Joshua 1, 6 through 9. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified, do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So there's one phrase in there he uses 3 times. What is it?
Be strong and courageous.
Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. And I read that and I thought, so that part must be important. Right? And it struck me, God didn't say, I will make you strong and courageous. He didn't say you are strong and courageous. He didn't say, if I was you, Joshua, I'd think about being strong and courageous. Right? He said, Joshua, be strong and courageous. Right? Do it. It's a command. The command God gave to Joshua is, be strong and courageous. Do it. Joshua surely was overwhelmed. Remember, we talked last week about he was a spy when they first scoped out the land. And he saw how big the enemies were. He saw how fortified the cities were. He had watched Moses lead. He knew it wasn't an easy job. There are disagreements and disputes. He's got to figure out who gets what. He knew this was no small task. But now he's up. Now it's his turn. Right? And he said one of 2 things. One of them might have been, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot, oh shoot. Right? Or I could have used a different vowel sound. Because he is overwhelmed. He is overwhelmed. And he starts to say something like, but what if I fail? Right? Here's my shot. I think I can do it. But what if I fail? What if I'm overcome by fear and anxiety? What if I'm not strong enough? What if I'm too scared? Sometimes we are the biggest obstacle to the promise of God for our lives. Sometimes the number one thing that keeps us from the promise is us wondering, questioning, thinking, I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the number one obstacle to the promise of God being made manifest in our lives is us. We can look around for someone else to blame. We can look around for some other circumstance, but we never look at ourselves. Because sometimes the biggest obstacle to the promise of God in our lives is us. And it's in those moments that God just has to command us to get out of our own way. Tell us. Make it happen. So here's Joshua. But what if I'm weak? But what if I'm too scared? God says, suck it up. Be strong and courageous.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. If he says, think about being strong and courageous, maybe work on being strong and courageous, Joshua goes, yeah, I've tried that. I've fought lots. I've led armies. I just can't do it. Right? But when the voice of God comes over you and says, no choice, command, be strong and courageous. There's little you can do but act. Because there are few things that can actually get in the way of the commands of God. So God commands Joshua, be strong and courageous. It's not a recommendation. It's not an advisement. It's not a lesson. It's a command. Be strong and courageous. And here's what's crazy, is that command of God, when Joshua just sort of receives that command and gets moving, it begins to build on itself. When we receive the command of God and we allow it to take hold in our life, we see that momentum begins to shift. Things begin to happen. The ball gets rolling. Right? Verses 10 through 18. So after God says all this stuff to Moses and he tells him, he commands him, be strong and courageous. Starting at verse 10, it says this. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. But to the Reubenites and Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. The Lord your God has given you rest and has granted you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men, fully armed, must cross over ahead of your brothers. You are to help your brothers until the Lord gives them rest as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your words, whatever you may command them, we will put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Ooh. So here's what's interesting about that. Well, it's interesting to me. Hopefully it's interesting to you. God commands Joshua, be strong and courageous. We've already covered the fact Joshua's probably overwhelmed. That's why he's got to hear that command 3 times. So Joshua overcomes fear and discouragement and anxiety, and he takes control of the situation. So there's several thousand people or something, right, that he's got to lead. If he calls the heads of those families together and goes, guys, what are we going to do? Moses just died. He was our leader for 40 years. What's going to happen? Right? That's probably not going to instill confidence. It's probably not the best way to go take on a couple of nations. Right? So instead, he says, all right, let's do it. We're going to cross the Jordan. We're going to go through a river into one of the most beautiful lands we know of in the whole world, occupied by some of the strongest people we've ever seen. We're going to do it. Get your stuff ready. Go ahead and pack up. It's happening. Not like, okay, I just took over. Give me a couple weeks to make a plan. Right? He says, pack up your stuff. We're going. We're going to cross this river. And all that stuff about the Reubenites and the Gadites, the nation of Israel is like a strip of land, right? And the river Jordan is right here on the east side. And the 2 tribes settled on outside of the promised land. There's a lot of theological implications there. But basically, they had already taken this land before they went into the promised land proper. And so they were kind of already home. So what Joshua is saying to them is like, I know you have rest, and your wives and your animals can stay, but all your fighting men must go with us to conquer this land for your brothers, your kin, right? The other 10, 11 tribes. And so that's what he's saying to them. He's saying, I don't want to hear anything about you're already home, this isn't your land. You're coming too. So he's taking control. He's saying, pack up your stuff. You guys, I know you're home. Send your fighting men too. We're about to take this land. We're going to do it. Right? And the reaction from the people is that, Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. And they say, if anybody rises up against you, we'll get rid of them. Keep doing what you're doing. Just be strong and courageous. That's how it ends. So Joshua is encouraged by God. God says, okay, Joshua, your turn. And he says, I know it's overwhelming. I know it's tough. It's implied, I think, in going, be strong and courageous. I'm commanding you to overcome fear and anxiety and discouragement. Right? And so Joshua goes, okay, all right. Be strong and courageous. Let's do it. Right? He commands himself to be strong and courageous. So he goes to the people and says, okay, pack up your stuff. We're going. And they go, thank God this guy's got some courage. Thank God he's got some strength. Because if God had given us some wishy-washy, overthinking it, scared guy, I'm not sure we'd be going with him. Thank God this guy is strong and courageous. So, sure enough, Joshua, we're with you. You're strong, you're courageous, we're going too. And if anybody speaks against you, we got them. So just keep doing what you do, be strong and courageous. Right? So there's this thing of, if we allow the command of God to take hold in our life and overcome the obstacles to faith, it will begin to snowball. Because Joshua received encouragement from God, and when he allowed it to take hold in his life, he ended up receiving encouragement from the people of Israel, from his brothers, from his community. So God said, be strong and courageous. So he was. And they said, perfect, we got your back. We're with you. Right? So, what's interesting is, there are lands, there are territories, there are places that are still left to be taken. We are still on the threshold of what God's promise is for his people. This gets kind of crazy. So, God's promise for us is that the whole world would bow down before him. God's promise for us is that this land would look like heaven. God's promise for us is that there would be no more sickness, no more pain, no more war. God's promise for us is that you wouldn't have to struggle with illness or depression. God's promise for us is that all of your relationships would be whole and life-giving. God's promise for us is that you would be completely fulfilled, never put down, filled with love. That's God's promise for us. But there are enemies who have occupied that territory. So God's promise is that my heart would be filled with love, but there are enemies, right, holding that territory. They're named fear and anxiety and discouragement, sometimes a little bit of hate, right? Standing as obstacles to the promise of God. And the temptation for us, when we see the scope of our call, right? We read accounts in the Gospels where Jesus is talking about the role of believers. We read accounts in Paul's letters about what the church could possibly be. And we go, that's not about us, is it? Right? We are tempted like Joshua was tempted. Joshua could have said, oh, yeah, I know that my people are going to occupy the best land in the world. But you don't mean I'm going to lead them in, right? I think we have that same temptation to say, God, that is great. I believe you are doing amazing things. But it's not like mine to lead people into that promise, is it? It's not my job. Somebody else could go capture that land, and I'll come. I'll help, set up the hearth. Right? I'll do some painting.
I'll do the decorating,
Yeah, decorating.
Table here, table there, we got it.
But let's look. Matthew 28. I'm violating one of my own rules. I rarely allow myself to turn to the New Testament when we're preaching on the Old Testament, because I want to affirm for you, there is gospel in the Old Testament. We just looked at it, right? God's command, he gave Joshua power. But here I think it's more explicit that in Matthew 28, God is speaking to you and me the same thing he spoke to Joshua. So that's the first book in the Old Testament, the very last chapter, or in the New Testament, first book of the New Testament, very last chapter of that book, about this far in. Right? Matthew 28. Starting at verse 16, 18. 28:18. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." This is like almost exactly what God just said to Joshua, right? He said, take the people in, take the land, conquer the enemies. Just like I was with Moses, I'll be with you. And so Jesus says to the disciples, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So he's going, I have authority, I'm giving it to you. In the Joshua passage, it was, Moses has died, now you're the guy. All the authority Moses had, you saw it, he did miracles, he ruled people, he led you through the desert. All the authority Moses had, Joshua, you have that authority. So go. Jesus says to you and me, I have all authority there ever was. I'm giving it to you. Go. I'll be with you. Go. So that's our same command. That be strong and courageous. God is with you. That's our command. There is land to be taken. It is ours. As co-heirs with Christ, peace and joy, the reign of peace and joy in this world is ours to claim. God has given it to us. And he says, now go, take it. I'm with you. Be strong, be courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Go. Man, that is huge. Huge. You've been given authority. You've been commanded to use it. God is with you. So here's the question. Here's what's tougher for us than I think it was for Joshua. Joshua and the Israelites are standing on the banks of the Jordan. They can see the promised land. So when God says to them, go and take it, it's pretty clear what they're going for. So the question for you and me today is, what are we to take? What are we to claim? What is it that in our lives or in our community the enemy is holding that God has already given to us? We just need to claim it. I'm tempted to ask for responses.
It's a hard one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah?
It is, because, well, I'll tell you what, today, your passage, Father's Day, hits right on. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're expecting, you're excited, then mom gives birth, and then your father says, suck it up, son.
Yeah.
Because the child is born.
Yeah.
And that, but, I mean, we would all love to go out and claim a great Christian community where everybody, is one, and it's not there. And we're afraid of that. Everybody's afraid of that.
Yeah.
Because I want my fellow neighbor to know and understand me and them there, but they want to keep their distance. Everybody keeps their distance here, Compared to, I've been in other states where Georgia, nobody has nothing but their church and the clothes on their back and the little bit of community that they have. Everybody's there and willing to help. Everybody here in Florida comes home, they go inside their house and they just want to be left alone. The community up there, they'll throw a festival every month for something. Nat festival, squash festival. That gets the community together. It's a good Christian community that brings them out. Just like what we're trying to do with our small groups. And that's what we all want. And our communities here don't want it. They just want to be left alone.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, right, part of the picture of the kingdom is relationship.
It is.
But one of the things that's occupying that territory right now is division. Mm-hmm. So God has promised us whole life-giving relationship, but right now that territory is occupied by division, misunderstanding, lack of love, right? Awesome.
Independence.
Sure, independence, as opposed to interdependence.
Right.
Yeah. That's good.
Okay.
What else? What else?
I mean, we're promised hope, and I think like the situation this past week in Charleston is just another, just like such a heartbreaking, like comes against, like, no, my world should be full of hope, and I see things on the news and I'm just crushed.
Mm-hmm.
That is not hope.
But that's what God gives us, that grasp of hope.
Right. So there's a world, right, who is whose the territory of hope is occupied by hate, misunderstanding, violence, right? And we've been commanded to go claim that territory so that hope might reign. What else?
It's going to fight against us the whole way.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to look at over the next several weeks is the fighting didn't stop as they claimed the land, right? And in fact, the land. And in fact, after they had actually conquered all those people, it still wasn't easy to hold the land, right? So, but today we're just talking about the command to go take it. So here's the thing. I think there are places in our lives and in our communities that God has given us that we have not yet taken possession of because there are enemies who are occupying that territory. Okay? They are called hate and misunderstanding and division. They are called discouragement and depression. They are called a fight you had with your brother or sister 10 years ago that has kept you not speaking to them. Those are the enemies we are up against. The obstacles to the full manifestation of the kingdom in our world. And whereas for the Israelites it might have been easy, the command of go, be strong and courageous was pack up your tents, pick up your sword, and start taking it. Right? For us it has to be sometimes be strong and courageous is lay yourself down so you can listen better. Sometimes be strong and courageous is don't worry so much about getting your neighbor baptized. Just help them understand that you love them. Sometimes be strong and courageous is, it's not about you, it's about what I'm doing. Sometimes be strong and courageous is give up your day, give up your money, give up your time so that you might be an agent for good in your community. Sometimes be strong and courageous is ask that hard question. Make that first phone call to that sibling you haven't talked to in 10 years. Sometimes that's be strong and courageous. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that it's... And in fact, I'm explicitly saying it's not always apparent what the next move is. But God is with us like He was with Moses. Christ lives in us by the power of His Spirit, and He's commanded us to go and take the land that He's already promised us. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.